You know that feeling when you check your phone and see breaking news that makes your stomach drop? That moment when the world suddenly feels dangerous and uncertain. Now imagine that feeling. But it lasts for 13 straight days, and instead of scrolling past it, you can't escape it. It's on every TV channel, every radio station, in every conversation. And the news isn't about some distant conflict or economic crisis. It's about nuclear war. I was 16 years old in October 1962. And I'm here to tell you what it was really like to live through the Cuban Missile Crisis. Not from a history textbook, but from the perspective of a teenager who genuinely believed the world might end before I turned 17. This is my story. Let me set the scene for you because 1962 was a completely different world than the one you know today. We didn't have smartphones, we didn't have the internet, we didn't even have CNN or 24-hour news cycles. Information came to us through 3 TV channels, the radio and newspapers that arrived once a day. When something happened, you found out about it hours later, sometimes the next morning. But here's what we did have. Fear. Constant, underlying, never quite goes away fear of nuclear annihilation. See, if you grew up after the Cold War ended, this might sound dramatic to you. But for my generation, the threat of nuclear war was as real as climate change is to you today. Except instead of worrying about what might happen in 50 years, we were worried about what might happen in 50 minutes. I grew up in a suburb outside of Philadelphia. Middle-class neighborhood, tree-lined streets, the whole American dream package. My dad worked at a factory. My mom stayed home with me and my 2 younger brothers. We had a black and white TV in the living room, a radio in the kitchen, and on weekends, we'd all pile into our Chevy Bel Air and drive to the shore. Normal life, right? Except once a month at school, we'd have these drills. Duck and cover drills, they called them. The alarm would sound and we'd all scramble under our desks, curl up in a ball, and cover our heads with our hands as if a wooden desk would protect us from a nuclear bomb. Even as a kid, I knew it was absurd. We all did. But we did it anyway because what else were we supposed to do? By the time I was a teenager, I'd seen enough newsreels and propaganda films to know what nuclear weapons could do. We'd all seen the footage from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We'd watched those test films of houses being vaporized by the blast wave. We knew that the bombs they were testing now were hundreds of times more powerful than the ones dropped on Japan. And we knew that the Soviet Union had thousands of them pointed at us. This wasn't theoretical. This wasn't some distant possibility. This was the reality we lived with every single day. So when I tell you that October 1962 was terrifying, understand that it was terrifying on top of an already anxious baseline. The Cold War had been going on for my entire conscious life. The Soviets had launched Sputnik when I was 11, setting off a panic about falling behind in the space race. We'd watched the Berlin Wall go up the year before. There had been close calls and tense moments and international incidents, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared us for those 13 days in October. October 22nd, 1962, a Monday. I remember it was unseasonably warm for late October. One of those perfect autumn days where the leaves are changing and there's just a hint of crispness in the air, but it's still warm enough to wear short sleeves. I was in Mr. Henderson's history class, and yes, the irony of learning about past wars while on the brink of a nuclear one isn't lost on me when the principal's voice came over the intercom. Teachers and students, please be advised that President Kennedy will be addressing the nation at 7 o'clock Eastern Time this evening. The address will concern a matter of national importance. That is all. The classroom went dead silent. You have to understand, presidents didn't just pop on TV to chat back then. When the president interrupted regular programming for a special address, it meant something serious was happening. Really serious. Mr. Henderson tried to continue the lesson, but nobody was paying attention. We were all looking at each other with the same question written on our faces. What now? The rumors started immediately. Between classes, in the hallways, at lunch. Everyone had a theory. The Soviets had invaded somewhere. There'd been an attack. We were going to war. Each rumor was worse than the last, spreading through the school like wildfire. By the time the final bell rang, the whole school was buzzing with nervous energy. I walked home with my best friend Tommy. We'd been friends since 3rd grade, the kind of friendship where you don't have to talk to communicate. But that day, we couldn't shut up. "My dad thinks it's about Berlin," Tommy said, kicking a stone down the sidewalk. "He says the Soviets are going to try to take West Berlin." "My uncle thinks it's bigger than that," I replied. "He was in World War II and he says he's never seen people this nervous." "Do you think—" Tommy started, then stopped. "Think what? Do you think this is it? Like the big one?" I didn't answer because I was thinking the same thing. When I got home, my mom was glued to the radio in the kitchen. She was supposed to be making dinner, but the vegetables sat forgotten on the cutting board. She looked up when I came in, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. "Your father's coming home early," she said. "We're all going to watch the president's speech together." The hours between getting home from school and 7 o'clock were the longest of my life up to that point. I tried to do my homework. I tried to read. I tried to listen to music. Nothing worked. My mind kept racing, imagining scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. My younger brothers didn't really understand what was happening. They were 9 and 11, still young enough to be shielded from the worst of it. But they picked up on the tension. Kids always do. Finally, it was 7 o'clock. Our whole family gathered in the living room. Dad sat in his armchair, Mom on the couch, me and my brothers on the floor. The TV was already on, showing the presidential seal. And then President Kennedy appeared. I'm going to quote you the first line of Kennedy's speech because it's burned into my memory forever. "Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba." Cuba. It was about Cuba. And then he said it. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. I felt my stomach drop. Missiles, nuclear missiles, 90 miles from Florida. Kennedy continued, and with each sentence, the situation got worse. The missiles could strike Washington, D.C., or any city on the eastern seaboard. They could reach as far as the Panama Canal, medium-range missiles that could strike most of the major cities in the Western Hemisphere. The Soviets had been lying about it. They'd been building these bases in secret. And then came the kicker. Kennedy announced a naval blockade of Cuba. We called it a quarantine, but we all knew what it meant. Any Soviet ship trying to bring weapons to Cuba would be stopped by the U.S. Navy, by force, if necessary. My dad let out a low whistle. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "He's actually doing it." The speech lasted about 17 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it ended, nobody moved. We just sat there, staring at the TV screen as news anchors began their analysis. "What does this mean?" my younger brother asked. My dad turned off the TV. "It means things are going to be very tense for a while, but President Kennedy is doing what he has to do to keep us safe." I could tell he was trying to sound reassuring, but his voice betrayed him. He was scared too. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in my life, I seriously contemplated the possibility that I might not live to be an adult, that I might not graduate from high school, that I might not go to college or get married or have kids or do any of the things I'd always assumed would happen. I thought about my girlfriend, Susan. We'd been dating for 3 months. Wholesome, innocent teenage dating. Movies, malted milks at the diner, holding hands at school. I thought about how I'd never told her I loved her because I was too scared and awkward and 16. What if I never got the chance? What if none of us got the chance? The next day, Tuesday, October the 23rd, school was different. About a third of the students didn't show up. Their parents had kept them home, either to be together as a family or because they'd already started evacuating to somewhere they thought might be safer. Where that might be, I have no idea. If the nukes started flying, there was nowhere safe. The teachers who did show up tried to maintain normalcy, but how do you teach algebra when the world might end? How do you discuss Shakespeare when nuclear missiles are being aimed at your city? In history class, Mr. Henderson abandoned the curriculum entirely. Instead, he pulled down the map of the world and explained what was happening. He showed us where Cuba was, where the Soviet Union was, where the missiles could reach. One girl in my class started crying, just broke down right there in the middle of class. Mr. Henderson didn't tell her to stop or pull herself together. He just nodded sympathetically and let her cry. Because what could he say? The news that day was all about the blockade going into effect. Soviet ships were on their way to Cuba. American warships were positioned to intercept them. The entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen when they met. Would the Soviet ships turn around? Would they try to run the blockade? Would the first shots of World War III be fired in the Caribbean? At lunch, Tommy and I sat outside on the bleachers, not eating. "My dad's digging a fallout shelter," Tommy said suddenly. "What?" "Started last night, in the backyard. He's convinced we're going to need it." "Is it going to help?" I asked. Tommy shrugged. He thinks so. Says if we can stay underground for a few weeks, we might survive the initial blasts and the worst of the radiation. I thought about our basement. We had some canned goods down there, some bottled water. Was that enough? Should we be doing more? "My dad says if the missiles launch, we'll have about 15 minutes warning," I said. 15 minutes to say goodbye to everything, Tommy replied. We sat in silence for a while. Then Tommy said something I've never forgotten. "I haven't even lived yet. I'm 16. I was supposed to have a whole life." "I know," I said. "It's not fair." "I know." What else was there to say? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Each day brought new developments, new tensions, new reasons to believe we were on the brink. Soviet ships were still approaching the blockade. Khrushchev was sending angry messages to Kennedy. The military was on high alert. B-52 bombers were in the air around the clock, loaded with nuclear weapons, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Every time you turned on the radio or the TV, there was more news, and none of it was good. At school, attendance kept dropping. The kids who were there were distracted, irritable, scared. Fights broke out over nothing. People snapped at each other. Everyone was on edge. The adults were trying to maintain normalcy, but you could see the cracks. My mom's hands shook when she poured coffee. My dad started smoking again after quitting 2 years earlier. Mr. Henderson showed up to class one day looking like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. Because he probably hadn't. The hardest part was the uncertainty. We didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. We didn't know if Kennedy and Khrushchev were negotiating or if they were just waiting to see who would blink first. All we could do was wait and hope and pray that someone, somewhere, would find a way out of this. I started carrying a small notebook with me everywhere. I'd write down thoughts, observations, things I wanted to remember. I think part of me believed that if I documented everything, if I wrote it all down, maybe it would somehow matter. Maybe someone would find it and know what these days were like. Or maybe I just needed to do something to feel less helpless. On Thursday night, we got news that some Soviet ships had turned back. They'd stopped before reaching the blockade line. That was good, right? That meant they were backing down? But then we heard that some ships were still coming, and that the missile sites in Cuba were still being built, were actually being built faster. The Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, said something that became famous. "We're eyeball to eyeball," and I think the other fellow just blinked. But had he? Had he really? Or were we just in the eye of the hurricane, with the worst still to come? Saturday, October 27th, 1962. If you ever read about the Cuban Missile Crisis, you'll see this day called Black Saturday. There's a reason for that. It was the day everything nearly fell apart. I woke up that morning to my dad shouting downstairs. Not angry shouting, scared shouting. I ran down to find him and my mom huddled around the radio. An American U-2 spy plane had been shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was dead. The room started spinning. This was it. This was the provocation that would start the war. The Soviets had killed an American serviceman. We'd have to respond, and they'd respond to our response. And then, my mom was crying. My dad just kept saying Jesus Christ over and over again. I went back upstairs and called Susan. "Did you hear?" I asked when she picked up. "About the plane?" "Yes." "Susan, I need to tell you something." "Okay. I love you. I know we're young and it probably sounds stupid, but I do. And if something happens, I needed you to know that." There was silence on the other end. Then, "I love you too." We stayed on the phone for an hour, not saying much, just being together in the only way we could. When I went back downstairs, my dad had the TV on. The news was getting worse. There were reports of another incident. A U-2 plane had accidentally strayed into Soviet airspace near Alaska, and Soviet fighters had scrambled to intercept it. American fighters had to escort it back. One wrong move, one trigger-happy pilot, one miscommunication. That's all it would take. The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. Every hour brought new reports, new tensions, new near misses. It felt like the universe was trying to start World War III and only luck and chance were preventing it. My family went to church that evening. We weren't particularly religious. We went on Easter and Christmas. That was about it. But that night, the church was packed. Standing room only. I'd never seen Father Murphy look so serious. His sermon wasn't the usual Sunday school stuff. He talked about faith in dark times, about hope when everything seems hopeless, about forgiveness and understanding and the possibility of peace even when war seems inevitable. And he led us in prayer. Not just a prayer, but the most intense, desperate prayer I've ever been part of. 200 people, all praying for the same thing. Please, God, don't let this be the end. I'm not sure I believed God was listening, but I prayed anyway. Sunday, October 28th. I woke up to silence. Not ominous silence, just quiet. Normal, suburban, Sunday morning quiet. I went downstairs and found my parents already up, listening to the radio, but they weren't tense. They weren't scared. My mom was smiling. "They're backing down," my dad said when he saw me. "The Soviets are backing down." I didn't believe it at first. It had to be a trick or a misunderstanding But then I heard the radio announcer myself. Khrushchev had sent a message to Kennedy. The Soviet Union would dismantle the missile sites in Cuba and remove the weapons. In exchange, the United States would pledge not to invade Cuba and would remove some missiles from Turkey. It was over. The crisis was over. I don't think I've ever felt relief like that in my entire life. It was physical, like a weight being lifted off my chest that I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. My mom hugged me. My dad hugged both of us. My brothers came running downstairs asking what was happening, and we told them the good news. We'd survived. The world had survived. Later that day, I went to meet Susan at the park. It was a beautiful October afternoon, crisp and clear, with leaves falling from the trees. Everything looked the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but somehow different. More precious, more vivid. We walked around the pond, holding hands, not talking much. Finally, Susan said, "I was so scared." Me too. I kept thinking about all the things I'd never get to do, all the places I'd never see. It made everything seem so small, you know. All the things we worry about, grades and who said what to whom and whether we're popular, none of it mattered. "I know exactly what you mean," I said. We sat on a bench and watched the ducks on the pond. Normal life, continuing. The world still spinning. "Do you think it'll happen again?" Susan asked. Another crisis like this? I don't know, I said. I hope not. But I wondered. I wondered if this was just the first of many close calls. If my generation would spend our whole lives living on the edge of annihilation, never knowing when the next crisis would come. I wondered if we'd learned anything from this, or if we'd just gotten lucky. Monday morning, I went back to school. Attendance was back up. Not quite to normal levels. But most kids were there. Everyone looked tired. Relieved, but exhausted. Mr. Henderson welcomed us back to history class with a wry smile. Well, he said, I think we all just experienced more history in 2 weeks than we usually cover in a semester. A few people laughed. It felt good to laugh. But things weren't entirely back to normal. They couldn't be. Some families had spent their entire savings on fallout shelters that they'd rushed to build. Some people had quit their jobs to be with their families. Some relationships had been broken by the stress, while others had been strengthened. Tommy's family had that fallout shelter now, a concrete bunker in their backyard with shelves full of canned goods and water barrels and a radio. His dad refused to fill it in, even after the crisis ended. Just because this one passed doesn't mean the next one will, he said. He wasn't wrong. The duck and cover drills continued. The fear of nuclear war didn't disappear, but it went back to being background radiation, so to speak, always there, always lurking, but not the immediate, all-consuming terror it had been for those 13 days. My relationship with Susan deepened after that. When you've told someone you love them because you thought the world might end, you can't really go back to casual dating. We became much more serious, much faster than we probably would have otherwise. We ended up getting married 6 years later in 1968. We've been together ever since. Tommy and I stayed friends through high school and college, though we drifted apart after that. Last I heard, he was living in Oregon, working as an engineer. I hope he's doing well. The world moved on. New crises came and went. Vietnam, Watergate, the fall of the Berlin Wall, September 11th. Each generation has its defining moments, its brushes with disaster. But for my generation, for those of us who were teenagers in October 1962, those 13 days remain the moment when the world held its breath and we all confronted our own mortality. Looking back now, more than 60 years later, I think about what those 13 days taught me. They taught me that the world is fragile, that peace is not guaranteed, that the decisions of a few people can affect the lives of billions. But they also taught me that catastrophe isn't inevitable, that even when things look hopeless, there's still a chance for reason and diplomacy to prevail, that people can step back from the brink. Kennedy and Khrushchev could have let pride and ideology push us into nuclear war. They could have decided that backing down was worse than risking everything, but they didn't. They found a way out. That doesn't mean they were heroes or that the Cold War was handled perfectly. There were plenty of mistakes and close calls and moments of insanity, but in that moment, when it mattered most, they chose survival over pride. The crisis also taught me to appreciate the everyday moments. After those 13 days, I never took for granted waking up in the morning, or having dinner with my family, or walking through the park on a fall afternoon. I learned that life is precious precisely because it's fragile, that love matters more than pride, that we have to hold on to our humanity even when, especially when, everything seems to be falling apart. Now, I know some of you watching this are probably thinking, okay, cool story, old man, but what does this have to do with me? Fair question. Here's the thing, every generation faces its own existential threats. For mine, it was nuclear war. For yours, it might be climate change or artificial intelligence or something we haven't even thought of yet. The specific threat might be different, but the underlying human challenge is the same. How do we face uncertain futures? How do we hold on to hope when things look bleak? How do we keep our humanity when we're terrified? One thing I learned from living through the Cuban Missile Crisis is that despair is easy. Giving up is easy. deciding that everything's hopeless and there's no point in trying. That's the easiest thing in the world. What's hard is continuing to live your life, to love people, to work toward a better future even when you're not sure there will be a future. What's hard is staying informed and engaged without letting fear paralyze you. What's hard is holding your leaders accountable while also recognizing the difficult decisions they face. What's hard is balancing awareness of danger with the ability to still experience joy. But that's what we have to do. Because the alternative is to live in constant terror, and that's not really living at all. The other thing I learned is that individual actions matter. Kennedy and Khrushchev were the main players, sure, but there were hundreds of other people involved in resolving that crisis. Diplomats and military officers and advisors and translators, each one making small decisions that, added together, kept us from destroying ourselves. You might feel powerless in the face of big global problems. I did too. But you're not. Every choice you make about how to treat people, how to engage with the world, how to contribute to your community, those choices matter. They might not change everything overnight, but they matter. I'm an old man now. I've lived through a lot, wars and recessions and technological revolutions. I've seen the world change in ways I never could have imagined when I was that scared 16-year-old in October 1962. But I still carry those 13 days with me. Sometimes, when I'm having trouble sleeping, I still think about that night after Kennedy's speech, staring at my ceiling and wondering if I'd see another sunrise. Sometimes, when I watch the news and see new tensions between countries, new conflicts brewing, I feel that old familiar fear creeping back. But mostly, I remember what it felt like when the crisis ended. That overwhelming relief and gratitude. That sense of getting a second chance. I try to hold on to that feeling. To remember that we're all here by grace and luck and the wisdom of people who chose peace over pride. I try to live in a way that honors the fact that we survived. That we get to be here, in this moment, with all its beauty and complexity and challenge. Because we so easily could have not been here at all. If you're watching this video and you're young, a teenager or in your 20s or 30s, I want you to know something. Your fears about the future are valid. The threats you face are real. I'm not going to tell you that everything will be fine or that you shouldn't worry. But I'm going to tell you that you're stronger than you think. That humanity has faced the brink before and stepped back. That even in the darkest moments, there are people working for peace, for understanding, for solutions. And I'm going to tell you that your life matters, not in some abstract cosmic sense, but in real, concrete ways. The relationships you build, the work you do, the kindness you show, all of it matters. Don't let fear paralyze you. Don't let uncertainty stop you from living. Love people, build things, make art, fight for what you believe in, be kind, be brave, be present, because that's all any of us can do. And it turns out, when enough people do it, it's actually quite a lot. October 1962 was the month I grew up. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because the world demanded it. I went into that crisis as a kid who thought he had all the time in the world. I came out of it as a young man who understood that time is precious and nothing is guaranteed. It's been 63 years since those 13 days. I've lived a good life, a long marriage, children and grandchildren, a career I was proud of. I got to do all those things I thought I might not get to do. But I've never forgotten what it felt like to be 16 and terrified and powerless in the face of forces beyond my control. I've never forgotten the relief of waking up on October 28th and realizing we'd survived. And I've never taken for granted the miracle of ordinary life continuing. That's my story. That's what it was like to be a teenager during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I hope you never have to experience anything like it. But if you do, I hope you'll remember that even in our darkest hours, we have each other. We have hope. We have the capacity to choose a better path. And that might just be enough. Thanks for watching this video. If you found this story meaningful or interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Whether you have questions about this period in history or your own stories to share about living through uncertain times. And if you're a history teacher or student, feel free to use this video in your classes. This is living history, and it's important that we remember these moments and learn from them. Most importantly, take care of each other. In an uncertain world, that's the one thing we can always control: how we treat the people around us. Stay curious, stay hopeful, and remember, we're all in this together. I'll see you in the next video.